Happy New Year, everyone, if it's not too late to say it. Hope you all had a wonderful Christmas, and I'm very pleased to welcome you back again for our January webinar with Dr. Kathryn Ferry. I'm Ruthie Good, the events coordinator for the Art Deco Society UK, and I'm so looking forward to introducing Kathryn again. But first, I'll run through a few reminders for you, as usual. So firstly, for auto-generated captions, please click on CC Live Transcription at the bottom of your screens, and then show subtitles. Also, a quick reminder as well that this is the Zoom webinar format, so it's different from a normal Zoom meeting that you might be used to. No one can see or hear you, including myself or Kathryn. So please sit back and relax. We won't hear anything that's going on in your house or see you or anything like that. We'll follow up tonight's presentation with a question and answer session from Kathryn. So if you have any questions for her, just type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, or you can use the chat function to share any thoughts. You can do this at any point during the proceedings, and then I'll read out all your questions and comments at the end. Please be respectful with your questions and comments, as you always are. And also, if you have any issues with sound or video, please use the chat function again to flag these up, and we'll do our best to resolve them behind the scenes. So now I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Kathryn Ferry. I think we can call her a very good friend of the Art Deco Society UK, because as well as having spoken previously for us on holiday camps and interwar seaside architecture, she also hosted both of our dive-in events last year, celebrating the Lido in the UK. She's a historian specialising in the architectural and cultural history of the seaside, and has written books on beach huts, seaside holidays and bungalows, as well as the official history of Butlins. Her next book on 20th century seaside architecture will be published by Batsford this May. Her wider research interests include a general love of the 20s and 30s, which prompted her to explore the overlooked Wembley Exhibition for a centenary article in Country Life magazine. She regularly contributes to television and radio and is passionate about sharing forgotten stories. So this leads us nicely onto the subject of Kathryn's talk for this evening, which focuses on a little known and largely forgotten event, the Empire Exhibition at Wembley, which actually foreshadowed the Paris Exposition of 1925. Thank you, Kathryn. We're all very excited to hear what you have to tell us this evening. So everyone sit back and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruthie. Right, I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Here we go. I hope you can all see that. So that's let's get my title slide. There we go. And this is the one that hopefully you've seen on the publicity for the talk. A very vibrant and deco looking image, I think you'd agree. As Ruthie alluded there, very few people know anything about the 1924 Empire Exhibition, but of course they do know about its most enduring legacy, and here it is, the Wembley Stadium. This was designed to seat more than 100,000 people, and it was the first building on the site to be completed, so that in 1923, when it opened, it hosted the Football Cup finals for the first time. And this lasted until 2003, when it was finally demolished and replaced. In this image, you see the famous twin towers designed by the exhibition architects John W. Simpson, Maxwell Ayrton, and Owen Williams, I'm going to come back to later. These men were responsible for overseeing the design of the whole site, but actually many other people contributed to the finished look of the exhibition too, which makes it a fascinating snapshot of where architecture and decorative art had got to in Britain in the early 1920s. we obviously know 1925, it's the centenary of the Paris Exposition, from which Art Deco takes its name. But what intrigued me about looking at Wembley is to see in the exhibition design how far Britain had already got, you know, how much sort of recognizably Deco design we could find there, what was happening, how far had we got? So the idea for an exhibition was first mooted before the First World War. And in 1919, the Prince of Wales agreed to become president of the organising committee. The question of location was decided by 1921, when the former pleasure grounds at Wembley Park were chosen as being within easy reach of central London with very good rail connections. And you can see those on this fantastic plan poster for the exhibition. So you've got the train coming in around the edge here to the main north entrance here, and then all these links back into the underground and here the heart of the empire. This site shows all those connections, and in the centre, the exhibition site itself, which covered 216 acres. This was meant to be the largest international exhibition ever, and the idea was to offer a complete tour of the British Empire as it stood at the time. You couldn't possibly hope to see it all in a day, maybe not even in a week. Some statistics for you. 78 governments took part. There were 1,000 exhibitors on display in the Palace of Engineering, which is up the top here with the train on the plan here. 800 more in the Palace of Industry opposite it, and these were all British exhibitors. So people would come in from the northernmost entrance here. I'll show you the building there shortly, and then be funneled down this central avenue past these huge buildings towards this artificial lake. Then we've got the pavilions of the Dominions of Australia and Canada, and then on the axis down at the bottom, the Empire Stadium. And there are lots of other buildings around India, South Africa, His Majesty's Government Pavilion here, and this big sort of blue and white area denotes the amusement park, which was a really big element of it as well. It wasn't all sort of educational and trade fair. It was a big entertainment element as well. Here we see a visualization of it, which was published in the Illustrated London News. And all these buildings that you see here, this is at the top on the left screen. Hopefully you can see my mouse. That's the north entrance that I showed you, and that's that central axis. So at the bottom here is the Wembley Stadium. All of these buildings pretty much were made of concrete, and that led to Wembley being dubbed the world's first concrete city. And actually, from the visualization, we get the real thing. This is an aerial photograph taken from the east. So we've now got the main entrance on the far right, looking towards the stadium on the far left. And it really shows you the immense scale of the endeavour. The amusement park, which you can see in the bottom, there's a great big roller coaster there, a scenic railway. That was 50 acres on its own, just for the amusement park. It was an endeavour then of epic proportions. So the question has to be, why has it been written out of our history? The answer is, of course, in the name. In the Architectural Review of May 1924, Harry Barnes observed that the British Empire exhibition has what he said was a difficult name. Even the Prime Minister feels it. It was held 6 years after the First World War, which actually, interestingly, was the same interval as would later occur between the Second World War and the Festival of Britain. The exhibition at that moment was intended to celebrate collaboration and friendship, but there's already evidence of a belief in the notion of empire sort of waning. For Barnes, he said it brought elusive memories of nursery rhymes at which I clutch only to find them gone. There's this sort of, it's out of reach. Interestingly, in the contemporary press, you do find these reports and evidence of a sort of increasing disquiet about the concept. And of course, a century on from the exhibition, our place in the world and our understanding of it have altered entirely. So in the post-colonial era, Britons prefer not to dwell on a past in which white men subjugated whole races for the sake of their imperial project. And that makes sense. That's totally defensible. But in regard to the Wembley exhibition, it does rather risk throwing the proverbial baby out with the bathwater, because the scale of the exhibition provided an exceptional opportunity for innovation across multiple different fields. And that's all simply been ignored. It isn't possible to cover everything in a single lecture, but I do want to give you a flavour of the event in its opening year in particular. I tried to get onto 1925, but there's so much to cover that it's just going to be a little bit at the end. But I'm going to look at how far the design in particular of the exhibition can be seen to be a sort of product of the emerging Art Deco style. So let's start with the tricky bit then. This is the kind of thing that makes us rightly uncomfortable. The idea of living villages, descriptions like this from the Illustrated London News of picturesque types, natives in these sort of mud huts and things. It demonstrates the prevailing racism of the time. There's a whole lecture, if not more, to be had about that. It's a serious subject that deserves measured analysis. So this isn't the place to do it, but this is about explaining and understanding the difficulties with unpicking an exhibition that is about empire. And there was cultural appropriation in architectural terms too. Exemplars were selected to be recreated at Wembley that were completely out of context. Here are some examples. They're from a publication called Wembley in Colour by Donald Maxwell. They're his sketches. And it gives you an idea of the sort of picturesque treatment. But there were some really strange juxtapositions that were created. So in the top left-hand corner, it's a bit blurry. It's a very small image, but on the page. But this is apparently a glimpse of the East from the railway, as if the East, all the countries that encapsulates, can be sort of brought into this small area, and you can see it as you go past on the train into Wembley. On the left-hand side is the Burmese pavilion of that image. You can see the domes of the Indian pavilion behind it. And then bizarrely enough, over the railway, that bridge is a reconstruction of Old London Bridge. You know, is that kind of mixing together and kind of the way these things collide that is both odd and interesting. I wonder, you know, did visitors question these things? Did they just marvel at what was placed in front of them? Nobody's really looked into all of this, but it's worth making the point that people traveled a lot less than they do now. So seeing the world on their doorstep, getting a sense of Nigeria, getting a sense of India, Ceylon from these pavilions did have a genuine appeal, I think. And there was an educational imperative behind much of the content, even if what was being taught is now obviously open to dispute. So spaces like these were definitely considered among the wonders of Wembley, but there was so much else besides. And I'm going to show you some of the key attractions. And before I talk about the design, these two exhibits had royal connections and were therefore very popular with the crowds. The famous one, I suppose, that lives to this day is Queen Mary's Doll's House. It was designed by the architect Sir Edwin Lutyens on the suggestion of Princess Marie-Louise, who was a cousin of King George V. And it was meant as a present for Queen Mary. The project was overseen by a committee from 1921, so it was years in the making. And by the time it was completed, the house had benefited from the input of 250 craftspeople and manufacturers, 60 artist decorators, 700 artists, 600 writers, and 500 donors. It was first shown at Wembley as a showcase for British workmanship, which it absolutely was. And it was seen by more than 1.5 million people during the duration of the exhibition. In July 1925, it was moved to Windsor Castle, and that's where it still is. Rather less easy to explain is the Prince of Wales in butter, which you see on the left-hand side. And the fascination with this was not so much that it was made of Canadian butter, but the fact that that butter could last 7 months while the exhibition opened as a result of advances in refrigeration. It was that, the refrigeration, that was the real wonder. The following year, the Prince of Wales was depicted in the Canadian pavilion in the guise of a Native American chief. But having spurred competition from its rival Dominion, the Canadian butter display was now beaten in scale by one from Australia, which showed a scene from their recent 4-1 win over England in the Ashes, showing top English batsman Jack Hobbs being stumped during the Sydney Test match. All of this in butter. I did tell you some of it was a bit weird. Here, though, this is an exhibit that I found astonishing in a different way. The empire was absolutely reliant upon coal for manufacturing and, of course, transport between all its countries. The railways, the steamships, you know, everything ran on coal. This fact could, of course, have been illustrated by a host of different displays, but actually the organisers decided that they wanted to build a full-sized colliery, complete with headgear and underground workings in the exhibition grounds itself. And so visitors could descend below ground to witness recent safety developments for themselves. And, you know, let's build a coal mine, chaps, So that was quite an amazing thing of itself, I think, really. And it was such a big site that there were 15 miles of road snaking around the exhibition site. And because of that, it required its own transport infrastructure. 2 elements of that are shown on this slide here, which is drawn from the Illustrated London News. As you can see, the bottom right image is perhaps the most pertinent to us today because it shows the electric cars which were available for rides around the exhibition. There were 2 types, and you can see them here. One was called an omnibus type. The other was available for private hire. They were modelled on the electric luggage carriers used at large railway stations, had seats for about a dozen people, and they moved along at a leisurely pace as the driver pointed out places of interest. The other image shows the workings of the other images, sorry, show the Never Stop Railway, which is a wonderful name for it. This travelled, as you can see, along a 1.5 mile circuit. There were 88 cars along the circuit, which could carry up to 20,000 passengers at a time. And I'll read you what it says from the Illustrated London News about how this worked. If you look at the illustration on the top, you'll see that sprue going along. Under the track is a cylinder revolving at 264 revolutions per minute. To this cylinder is fixed a spiral electrically driven, so that the spirals are close together at the stations, widening out between stations and then narrowing down again. You can see that at the stations at either side, the spiral is much thinner. With the spirals close together, the coaches, which have rollers working on the spiral fixed to their bogies, go slowly through stations at about 2 miles per hour. But they move faster as the thread of this gigantic Archimedean screw becomes coarser. And actually, they could go up to 24 miles an hour. And this is what it actually looked like. You can see that screw underneath the carriages there in this photograph. Shows were another feature of the exhibition, which were demonstrating the potential of the stadium for more than just football. Musical concerts included mass bands and the Imperial Choir, which was said to be the largest ever heard, with some 10,000 trained voices taking part. There was a pageant of empire and a military tattoo, but perhaps more surprising was the 2-week-long international rodeo in June, featuring riders from the US, Canada, Australia, and Argentina. And you can see the publicity image for it. Then in October, there were a series of baseball matches held at Wembley, which also surprised me. And so here are some drawings by the architects for the Empire Stadium. These ones published in the Architectural Press in 1922. The towers have something of Lutyens' Delhi about them, but the official guide stated that, I quote, "There is not in all England a modern building that can compete with the Empire Stadium in the effect it creates upon the mind of the spectator. In design, it is vast and imposing. In construction, it has the solid quality that appears to defy time. In point of size, it challenges comparison with anything of the kind in the world. Now, the reference to solid construction defying time puts the lie to the idea that the stadium was built to be temporary. You might look it up on Wikipedia, where it states that the intention was to demolish it at the end of the exhibition period, but that is just not true. Indeed, all the main buildings were anticipated to be permanent. The official guide insisted that there is no ephemeral structure designed to endure for a season and pass thereafter into desolation or decay. These were solid because using concrete and steel, there could be no lesser foundation to serve the purpose of empire. So they're really saying something, at least the organisers, about the longevity of, I suppose, the exhibition and maybe empire as well. This is the team then responsible for the Wembley vision. Unfortunately, they're all pictures of them as older men, but certainly Owen Williams was relatively young at the time. But if you look at the dates of their births and deaths, they did cover quite a number of different generations. There were two architects, John W. Simpson and Maxwell Ayrton, who were in partnership, and the much younger Owen Williams, who was an engineer. Simpson then was the senior partner. Back in 1901, he had co-designed the Palace of Fine Arts for the Glasgow International Exhibition, which, if you know the Kelvin Grove Art Gallery and Museum, that was his building. He was noted for his school buildings, in particular Rodine near Brighton. He had served as the president of the Royal Institute of British Architects and also was well known for his internationalist outlook, and perhaps that was part of the reason he was chosen for the exhibition. But contemporary reports confirmed by Simpson's obituarist actually suggest that the energy and invention came from the pairing of Simpson's younger colleague, Maxwell Ayrton, in the centre, with consulting engineer Owen Williams. Harry Barnes, who we've heard from before, said that theirs was a marriage of true minds. They have shown the possibility of collaboration and cooperation between architect and engineer, each enhancing the work of the other. So I think you get a sense that together they just kind of reveled in the chance to exploit new materials with some pretty extraordinary results. So I've said that the buildings were meant to last, but concrete construction had other benefits in the aftermath of the war too. So at that point, bricks and bricklayers were still in short supply. By contrast, concrete was both cheap and quick. A vast labour force could be trained to use it. And that was really important because when he cut the first sod at Wembley Park in January 1922, the Duke of York voiced his hope that the exhibition building programme would provide much needed work for unemployed veterans. So there is really a social agenda to this as well, benefiting people, veterans who don't have any work or income. The other thing about this team is that not many people at this time had serious experience of working with reinforced concrete. So the appointment of Owen Williams was really important. His background placed him among a very small group of experts. After graduating from London University in 1911, he worked for the Indented Bar and Concrete Company. Then he went on to the Trust Concrete Steel Company. During the war, he gained expertise in aeronautical engineering before designing concrete ships for the Admiralty. So he really got a breadth of experience. And actually, in the 1930s, he went on to build some really significant modernist buildings. And you can see here his Dorchester Hotel, Pioneer Health Centre at Peckham, and indeed the Empire Pool at Wembley. He brought all of his varied talents to the Empire Exhibition and was recognised for his expertise there with a knighthood at the age of just 34. It also helped that the contractors, Sir Robert McAlpine and Company, had considerable experience of working with concrete as well. I've jumped ahead in time a bit, but that's just to show you the importance of Owen Williams then and later. Let's go back to 1924 and see what what kind of groundbreaking structures they were creating. So here we've got, I showed you the north entrance on that curve surrounding gardens, and that's what you see on the left-hand side, and then the entrance to the Palace of Industry on the right. By this point, the use of concrete had moved beyond its experimental phase, and according to the trade journal, Concrete and Constructional Engineering, the whole exhibition is a triumph of this material. Now, when it came to the large national pavilions of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, their authorities chose to paint them in shades of white or a kind of off-white. But for the British ones, Ayrton and Williams designed their buildings to showcase concrete in its raw state. So when you're looking at these as black and white images, you should read that as grey, that concrete. And reactions were mixed, as you might expect. Because it was quite a radical thing to do, Professor Charles Riley found the mud colour, as he said, of the naked material infinitely depressing. Professor Patrick Abercrombie called it frank and grim, but he did also acknowledge its originality because it was, he said, the extreme opposite to the florid plaster treatment of outrageous Moorishness that was frequently adopted at exhibitions. So there was this kind of over-the-top exoticism that had been seen in exhibitions like the White City previously. And Wembley just completely changed ideas about that. So at the north entrance, you can see not only the entrance building, but there were these curved colonnades that sort of funneled people down into the central avenue. And what you don't get in this monochrome image is, of course, the effect of the hanging baskets and the planting that were crucial to sort of moderating the greyness and softening it. This then is the British Government Pavilion. It was criticised for being out on a limb away from the centre of the exhibition, but architecturally, it was widely acknowledged as the site's highest achievement. In his recent posthumously published book, Interwar, architectural historian Gavin Stamp called it a severe temple, as much Egyptian as Greek, stretched horizontally. You can see the lions guarding it, and the lion was the symbol of Wembley. 6 of these were created at the entrance, and then a lofty portico above it was given added dignity by the gilded grills set between its square piers, and you can just kind of see those behind the lion, the gold colour there. This pavilion only took 8 months to build because all its walls were cast in situ using timber framework, and you can see in the picture on the right actually a sort of close-up of that concrete, what it looked like. You can see the lines on it. To avoid ugliness and mask any irregular finish between one day's concreting and the next, deep horizontal lines, or what you might call rustications, were created across the facade. And then they created vertical fluting as well to give it extra texture. By using these techniques, the exhibition structures managed to combine a very simplified yet monumental classicism with innovative construction methods. And in terms of trying to label this, which obviously critics like to do, the Illustrated London News declared that if the style is to have a name, it must be Georgian, for it is essentially the product of our own day. It's sort of prefiguring the 1960s here, almost, with this kind of the aesthetic of this concrete here. And that was used throughout the exhibition, as I've said, and in other places, not just the building. So here we see the parabolic arched bridges over the artificial lake, and these lamp standards, which you see in all of the pictures, that are sort of unifying presence around the whole site. They were crowned with geographical globes of opal glass. So they must have given up a really beautiful effect. In the background on the right-hand side, you've got the Civic Hall, and you can see above it, it says Liverpool Hull. I'm not quite sure which B it is to the left, but this space was specifically designed so that a series of different local councils could come down and hold their council meetings at Wembley over the duration of the exhibition. Now we're going to go into some of the exhibition's buildings. This is the Palace of Engineering. It was the largest building at Wembley. But in fact, it was actually the largest concrete building in the world at this point. It occupied 4 acres of land on its own. The American Magazine of Art considered it a huge success. It said, in it, the official architects have shown a craftsman's skill in using their material to express itself and the things their building houses. The light, strong, well-designed arches symbolize machinery to perfection, and one feels that the designers, while having a knowledge of American and continental forms, have put into it their personality and that of England. So inside here, you can see the machinery on display here, but there were 5 key sections dedicated to shipbuilding, machine and general engineering, then electrical engineering, motor engineering, land transport, and water transport. To get all of this stuff into the building, they actually had railway lines running right through the ground floor. And that meant that they could bring in trains, submarines to put them on display. There were also models of the London docks, the Port of Liverpool, the Manchester Ship Canal. And so this was a vast and progressive space. This is the Palace of Industry, which has quite a different look to it. It's got similar steel roof, letting in lots of light. This was filled with the produce of Britain's leading industries, grouped by type and designed to appeal to casual visitors, as well as kind of businessmen and tradespeople who might come to see what their competitors were offering, perhaps. This ranged from, and there's a vast long list, cotton to clocks, paper to pottery, chemical industries, food, sports, boots, tobacco, musical instruments, pretty much everything that Britain made could be found in this palace. And you can see on the right-hand side, pottery there and some of the pottery here, and the kind of trade counters, the stalls with the people behind them here. And there was a sense of progress evident in this building as well, under the guiding hand of Sir Lawrence Weaver, who was appointed the director of UK exhibits, and he was a former architectural editor at Country Life magazine. He changed the kind of format for this sort of space. From the 1851 Great Exhibition building in Hyde Park, there had been a sort of set way of doing things, and he persuaded exhibitors to move towards this idea of pavilions rather than sort of streets that you walk up and down, these pavilions that you go into and the exhibits are behind. This really delivered a new artistic unity because he also got the exhibitors to accept that displays should be designed by qualified trained architects. There wasn't an overall plan. The architects worked individually, but because they were, it wasn't all coming just from the businesses themselves. There was a sort of artistic element to it. It really gave it a different feel. And you've got these decorative porticos here, which were the key element of the design, which sort of enticed people in. I'm going to show you some of these up close. But if I show you, you've got pottery here. This is one of the Ulster pavilions that I'm going to show you in a minute. And here's what some of them look like then, and the people who designed them. So going back to pottery, I think the one that we saw was probably the Pilkington portico. And that one, as well as the Wedgwood portico, they were both designed by the architect Oliver Hill, who came to greater prominence during the 1920s and 30s. I mean, he designed one of my favourite buildings, the Midland Hotel in Morecambe. Then the Moorcroft pottery portico was designed by a different architect, Edward Morph, but it's very much in the same sort of vein. It still feels like it's part of a united exhibition. And then on the right, we've got the gas portico, the tobacco portico, which has a bit of kind of colonial American flavour about it. More quirky, we have the baronial castle of Scotch whisky portico by Percy Morley Horder, and my personal favourite, the custard portico, which I love the willow pattern for birds custard by Stanley Peach. I mentioned the Ulster portico before, and there were 2 Ulster porticos at either end of the display, and these were both designed by Clough Williams Ellis. behind the porticos, there was 6,000 square feet of space taken to show the industrial activities of Northern Ireland. You can see here, I think, a sort of sense of Clough Williams-Ellis going into Portmeirion, which was the coastal village he's very famous for now, which he started working on in 1925, so just the year after Wembley. And you can see his personal kind of style in both. And I'm rather intrigued, having seen this picture of that sort of column with the ball on and this, I don't know whether it's an eagle, or, but it really looks like these that came from the Wembley exhibition, as you can see in the two pictures in black and white. And I wonder whether that actually, the one at Portmeirion, did in fact come from Wembley. And that's another thing I need to research. But it would be fantastic to have colour images of the Wembley ones, but I haven't ever seen them, and I haven't really seen them described. I think they were coloured, but I don't know what coloured. But you maybe have to fill in the colours from Portmeirion with these. Clough Williams-Ellis was one of several architects who worked elsewhere around the exhibition as well, not just in the Palace of Industry. And he was responsible for this building, the Concrete Utilities Bureau, which wasn't as monochrome as you see it here, because it did feature blue bands under the coping and at the bearing of the lintels. The thing that I want to draw your attention to is it's much kind of chunkier than the Ulster pavilions, but more than that, I want to draw your attention to the plaques, which you can just about make out across the front here. There's 4 main ones, I think. And these were created by the sculptor Gilbert Bayes. And I can show you these because they were published in Concrete and Construction Engineering magazine. Gilbert Bayes was a significant figure. In 1925, he was elected Master of the Art Workers Guild. And that same year, he won a gold medal and diploma of honour at the Paris Exposition. I looked him up just to find out his basic biography, obviously on Wikipedia, and these don't appear there. And I think that is kind of typical of the work that people created at the Empire Exhibition. It just doesn't crop up in lists of works of any of these people, really, despite being seen by millions of these people, you know, millions of visitors. This stuff has been effectively forgotten. And that's a real shame, I think, because if you look at the quality of these are the clay molds of the cement plaques that were produced for the building, but they are that sort of cubist, angular element of them. They're definitely what I think we'd sort of include in the Art Deco definition, really. And so it would be good to know more about these things. So I'm going to return now to the Palace of Industry to see 2 designs by another really important architect of the period, Joseph Emberton. Here he is with his dates. Next to him is the Lion Kiosk, which housed the official publication stall, because the lion is a symbol of Wembley. And then on the right, the Nobel Industries Hall. And Lawrence Weaver, in his description of this, said that the front of the Nobel Industries Hall in silver, gold and colours is in some ways the most successful thing in this palace, for Mr. Emberton has been content simply to emphasise the big lines he found. Of all the professional designers employed at Wembley, Emberton really seemed to shine as the most successful and prolific author of these small structures. And actually, in the official guidebook, which was sold in its millions, he was referred to as a young architect with ideas of his own. So in 1924, he was 35. Emberton was responsible for many of the between sort of 30 and 40 advertising kiosks in the grounds, and the guidebook described his pioneering method thus: he refused to design buildings which would have to be labelled. His design is its own label. Taking as his starting point the advertising poster or the trade device of packaging of the firm for which he was working, he proceeded to design a poster in 3 dimensions. As the public is familiar with the posters of all the big national advertisers, so it will recognise at Wembley the buildings in which each particular firm's wares are displayed. In each case, the building is logical and beautiful in its own right, while serving to advertise the commodity that is being sold inside. So you can see here with the advert for Sharp's super cream toffee with this parrot character in it that people, you know, knew immediately stood for Sharp's, and how Emberton has translated that into a kiosk using the box of toffee on the roof there and this character. And it was, as the postcard said, the talk of the exhibition. I think he probably also did this one as well, because it's so very much in the same vein, the Macintosh toffee kiosk. And then when he designed the OXO pavilion, he put a giant OXO cube on the top of its domed roof. I've only read about that and not seen that one, but that would be something to see, I think. As you can see from this picture on the right, there were a series of these advertising kiosks bordering the artificial lake at the centre of the site. All of them were, again, made of concrete. But rather than being cast concrete, these were made of the cheaper breeze blocks. And that was quite a novel thing at the time, but it was cheap, it was quick, and they could be painted. They were finished with something called keen cement and then painted in bright colours. You can see this is the John Bull stand on the left-hand side as well. And this one is quite remarkable. Another Joseph Emberton work. This is the extraordinary State Express Cigarettes Pavilion. During construction on the left, and then as it's completed on the right-hand side, seems to be a kind of huge timber frame. If you look at the area that's the dome, you can get a sense of the scale because there's a little workman on there. And I'm not sure what these are cement panels covering it. I'm not really sure about the construction techniques, but it is so striking as a building. Less than a decade later, Emberton would be one of only 2 architects to represent England at the 1932 International Exhibition of Modern Architecture in New York with his Royal Corinthian Yacht Club at Burnham on Crouch in Essex. So, you know, he went on to great things. And in 1924, I think structures like this would have been seen as extremely modern. And I'd like to think that they show real British ingenuity in the emergence of a new style for the interwar period. And the same can be said for these structures designed for musical entertainment and dancing. So the bandstand you can see on the left, that used the same breeze block construction as the kiosks. I haven't found much detail about its construction, but it strikes me that perhaps that checkerboard pattern there that is so sort of geometrically intense and striking, that is perhaps the result of the shape of the blocks themselves, inspiring the design. And we do actually know that, according to this sketch, that it was yellow and white rather than it looks as if it was black and white. And luckily we have some kind of sense of what it was. And the image of the dance hall there, that's really not published very frequently. But this cigarette card, although it's very indistinct, it does seem to show a kind of geometric pattern along the cornice line here. So it'd be great to find out a bit more about that. But obviously dancing was such a craze in the 1920s. They had to have a dance hall. And then the amusement park, of course. And the stepped effect and check pattern of the bandstand seems to have been echoed in the entrance to the amusement park that you can see here. There were an unprecedented array of rides here and attractions spread over the nearly 50 acres at the northeast corner. And actually getting all those rides cost about £1.5 million. There was an attempt to impose order on the space as well, because the official guide said, before the first rod of turf was cut, the most eminent architects, artists and showmen in the amusement world foregathered in consultation. They laid down a definite artistic plan for the park they were designing, which was to be systematically constructed. And that's trying to kind of move on from the old-fashioned fairgrounds, really, with a new concept. And I'm just including the restaurant image here because you can sort of see that on the corner of the coloured postcard, this beautiful scene above the colonnade tea room, which I don't know, has a bit of a kind of Clarice Cliffy sort of feel to it. Maybe I'm reading things backwards into it, but, you know, can kind of see things, how they might progress from here. This is the floral street in the amusement park, which I absolutely love. And this is the Never Stop Railway going above it. look at these vast vases and their flowers. Goodness knows how they created those, but it's a rather wonderful image. And the amusement park itself, as illustrated in the Illustrated London News, you can see the kind of range of some of these attractions. We've got the mountain water shoot here, the Derby races. We've got a safety racer that had a thing about creating these kind of fake mountains, and this kind of huge slide that you could ride down. And here's a photograph of the mountain water shoot and the globe that you could go inside. But before I leave the 1924 exhibition, there are two final areas that I wanted to highlight in terms of design and progress. To the west of the Palace of Industry was the Palace of Arts, and that featured paintings and sculpture, you know, sort of traditional arts, but also an extremely popular suite of 6 period rooms. The choice of timescale for these rooms betrayed contemporary preferences, because they started with a praiseworthy panelled Georgian apartment of around 1750. They slipped into the Regency, and then, as you can see on the left, what was called a painfully faithful rendering of the mid-Victorian parlour. I mean, this was absolutely completely out of fashion by this point. Then it in turn gave way to what the organisers deemed the sounder influence of William Morris and William de Morgan, so the arts and crafts period of the 1888 room here. But then visitors were shown 2 rooms from 1924. So this is the apparently the top interior decoration of 1924. This is the bedroom I'm showing you by W.J. Palmer Jones. It's relatively plain. It's pared back. It's definitely not Victorian, and nor is it arts and crafts. It's kind of a neo-Georgian style. It's still a bit classical, really. Maybe little hints of in that fireplace, perhaps it could be a bit deco-y. And then this is the 1924 hall and dining room, which was designed by Lord Gerald Wellesley and Trenwith Wells. Now, all of these room schemes were chosen in a competition organised by Country Life magazine. The judges of that were very well-established figures. So Sir Edwin Lutyens, Sir Lawrence Weaver, Percy Morley Horder. But even they expressed real disappointment, actually, at the continuing reuse of historic styles, because they had asked to have something which is markedly of our own time. That was in the kind of competition brief. So we're getting these 1924 rooms and they're being displayed, but even the judges who chose them thought they weren't really quite up to scratch. And they do look distinctly tame, you know, when you think of what came out of the 1925 Paris Exposition the following year, they're less interesting even than what was going on in the Palace of Industry and indeed in the amusement park. So this kind of shows this kind of complexity of the period. The last place, and perhaps more influential actually on interior design and fashion, is this one. It's a replica of Tutankhamun's tomb created underground in the amusement park. And this was another one that I was a bit flabbergasted to find. I had no idea that a replica of this was ever built. I mean, you might have been aware of this, but I've never seen it anywhere. It was constructed by William Aumonier, excuse me, under the direct supervision of Arthur Weigel, who was described as the famous Egyptologist. And the reconstructions came from his personal photos and sketches made in the tomb itself. And you can see here, as the caption says, to Tutankhamun's tomb by turnstile. You know, you paid your money and you went down the ladder. And you can see the tourists, the visitors, looking in to the tomb on the right-hand side picture. So this chap, Arthur Weigel, was also, he was an Egyptologist, but he was a stage designer, journalist, and author whose works span a whole range from histories of ancient Egypt through historical biographies, guidebooks, popular novels, screenplays, and lyrics. So he was kind of a popularizing figure, really. And he covered the opening of the tomb of Tutankhamun as correspondent of the Daily Mail, in direct opposition to Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon's attempts to monopolize it with the Times. So it was interesting that he really thought it should reach a broader public, and that's what he managed to achieve at Wembley. And here we see some of the artifacts being created, the replicas of these in the studio, and you can see them sort of semi-painted. There's extraordinary two pairs of legs hanging down from the ceiling on the left-hand side. We've got the Guardian statues. You know, everything is painstakingly put together, and obviously these are in colour. These are being painted as the originals, and that surely has to be really important in sort of building on the impact and the influence that the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb had in decorative art at that time. So I think this, you know, they're really, you could really look into this a bit more, because 18 million visitors went to Wembley between April and November 1924. Maybe not all of those saw the tomb of Tutankhamun, but a high proportion, I'm sure, must have done, because it was such a fascinating and current thing to have on display. So that's an interesting area that kind of, so much of this deserves extra research, but that one in particular. So the Empire Exhibition, I mean, I've thrown some of the figures around, 1.5 million just for the amusement park. The cost was massive, and it didn't recoup it. And so in 1925, they'd got these permanent buildings that they'd put up. So they tried to open it again for a second season to get some of that money back. And it's interesting how the look of the posters just over that year has changed quite significantly for the 1925 ones here. I mean, these are they just sort of have such a sort of Art Deco vibe, but really they're absolutely contemporary with the Paris Exposition. They're having to make it look fantastically appealing because lots of people have seen it last year, so they need to do something a bit different. And here's some more promotional images. These are by Gregory Brown, who started designing posters for the London Underground in 1914 and ultimately produced more than 70 designs for them. In 1925, interestingly, he won a gold medal at the Paris Exposition for his textile designs. The style of these is very, you know, it's minimal. Everything's pared down. It's that sense that we associate with the interwar Art Deco period in this graphic design field. And yet, on the right-hand side, we've got this was a Georgian building, a Georgian house built as a part of the exhibition in 1924. So it kind of shows you some of the mismatches and the interesting differences of in decorative art at that time, where you've got the looking backwards and looking forwards at the same time. And the tagline on the left-hand side, the same empire, but a new exhibition. I haven't really had time, as I said, I'm afraid, to go into exactly what that new exhibition looked like, because there's just so much to go through, really. But there is this very weird kind of commercialization of some of these spaces that comes up with some rather strange creations. So this is the Burma Pavilion I show you on the left-hand side in a 1924 postcard, and I found this 1925 postcard, and this was produced by Schweppes. And on the back of it, if you read down below, it says, the Burma Pavilion and grounds are by general consent one of the most picturesque and attractive features of the exhibition. Acquired by Schweppes Limited in 1925, the interior, reconstructed as a Tudor village, provides a most pleasing and cool rendezvous to sell fizzy drinks. And they clearly see no issue at all in putting this Tudor village inside a Burmese pavilion. And I find that really rather sweet in a way, or just I don't know what's going on there. It's or disrespectful, or I don't even know what that is. It just shows these kind of cultural clashes, I suppose, that you get, particularly in this second incarnation, I think. But that didn't last very long, and it was really difficult to find permanent new uses for these buildings at Wembley, of course, beyond the stadium. And even the stadium, though it was grade 2 listed, could not survive. In 2003, it was entirely demolished and it's rebuilt. Of course, the name sticks, but any sort of legacy from the exhibition went with it, really. So in the 1970s as well, when these pictures come from, concrete and the early history of concrete just wasn't of interest. You know, the idea that these buildings had an importance in constructional history of our country, of the world. You know, it's the largest concrete building in the world. That just wasn't relevant at all. Concrete was everywhere by the late 1970s. There was a local campaign that fought hard to save the British Government Pavilion and the Palace of Engineering, but they were repeatedly turned down for listing. So that means today there's very little physical evidence left of the exhibition. But as I have discovered, there is a lot of documentary evidence. There's images and there's souvenirs. And so perhaps it's time to start looking at some of this properly. Thank you very much.
What? Hi, thank you so much. We have a few comments and questions for you, Kathryn. That was wonderful. Okay, let me see. Okay, someone who's anonymous, so I can't name check them, says that about to open in Brent is an exhibition called Becoming Brent. This is really to celebrate what Brent has become, but is based on how the British Empire exhibition set the context for the development of Wembley as a community. So, Kathryn, I'm assuming you're familiar with this.
I'm not, so I'm going to hightail it down there and then go see. Yes, of course, they're very pertinent locally, isn't it? But it is extraordinary that something that was of such sort of national significance as well is not really better known. But definitely that sounds worth visiting. Thank you for that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, and in the chat, we've got a few comments. Nina says, considering the exotic buildings were made from concrete, there was some really significant skills on show to make us believe in the gateway of India, etc.
I think, that makes sense. I mean, I think the idea that you could create these buildings that were made from traditional materials, that you could recreate them in concrete and make them believable, you know, that's some feat, really, isn't it? And I think that sort of speaks to the fact that that they were testing out the potential of concrete here and doing things with it that were quite new and different. And even though that was sort of trying to replicate something else, that very fact is interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kathryn, I know I'm just sort of popping in here with a note that I made, which kind of leads on from this. You mentioned earlier on in your talk about prefiguring the 1960s. And I was just wondering if you could expand. Did you mean the architecture and the concrete? The concrete
in particular. Yeah, I think the finish of the concrete. Because because what was significant about these Wembley buildings, the British, the Palace of Industry, the Government Pavilion, they were all left essentially naked. So they were grey. They were, you know, and that if you think about 1930s modernist buildings, they're very white, aren't they? You know, that's not what they tried to do at Wembley. It was about sort of celebrating the material for itself, a very early instance of that, which then kind of became a key element of brutalism.
Right, later on in the city, you're right.
Yeah. So it jumped, you know, from Wembley on, and that's I don't know how, that's not really acknowledged very much. That sort of that use of that very
raw concrete.
That rawness to it must have been quite startling, I think.
Yeah, it's almost like it kind of just jumped 30 or 40 years into the future.
I mean, some 1930s buildings were obviously like that, but there seemed to be more of them that were trying to get that sort of flat, sleek, streamlined aesthetic. And white's really the color of that, isn't it? So
Okay, Fee says, where did the funding for the building slash site slash exhibition come from? It must have been a large sum and post-war as well.
That is a very good question, and actually I don't know the answer to that. I think a lot of it came from central government, because it was supported by the Prince of Wales as president, I think he was, did I say? But whether all of the colonies, all of the dominions were also expected to put money in to it as an imperial project, I'm not sure. That is actually something really, yes, that's really important to find out, really, isn't it? How because obviously the post-war, the expense of that, you'd think that putting on that kind of show, but then they did it in 1951, didn't they? The Festival of Britain was I think government funded. So
yeah, after the Second World War, maybe it's all to do with rebuilding morale.
It's promotion, isn't it? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, publicity.
Harry says some of the permanent buildings were actually given limited lifetime. Yeah. When the site was auctioned off in 1926, those buildings were to be dismantled within a year or two, a condition of their sale.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, certainly the intention in 1924 or in the early 20s seems to have been that they should have a permanent life, but they couldn't keep the whole of the site like that, presumably, anyway.
Solid construction defying time.
Yes.
I noticed.
Yes. Well, for as long as it's convenient.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Nina says Burma Pavilion. Were Schweppes perhaps selling their tonic water, which of course was popular in the empire for its anti-malarial properties?
Well, they could have been trading on that, but then why did they put it in a Tudor village?
Yeah.
I don't know I don't quite understand where that fits in, but yes, that you could say there's a link there, couldn't you?
Geraldine says there's an amusing article on the humours of Wembley by Fen Sherry in the Strand magazine, September 1924.
Okay, I will have a look at that. Thank you.
There's another question. What was the ticket price for the exhibition?
I'm not sure, actually. The official guide was 1 shilling.
Right.
But I don't know whether there was a sort of series of different. I mean, it's sort of from the Great Exhibition onwards. They seem to there were different scales of entry for different days and things. So whether that was the same, or I'm not sure, actually. I have to look that up. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay. Patricia North says, a slight tangent. The exhibition plays a part in the Woodhouse story, The Rummy Affair of Old Biffy in Carry On Jeeves.
Okay.
That's amazing. That's fantastic. Okay.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you.
Yeah. Linda says, there was a local campaign in Wembley to save the 2 lions that were at the entrance to the stadium, which was successful. And they are all that remained of the old stadium. There's also now something new to be built where the railway station was. And there is a planning condition agreed that the new building is to contain a memorial plaque describing the exhibition.
Oh, well, that's good.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, Andrew says, who financed it? How did it work? Was it government organised with individual organisations buying pitches?
Well, I think the idea of the buying pitches, I think that certainly in the Palace of Industry, all of those exhibitors would have paid to be there. So there is an income being generated from all those companies. And obviously there's a kind of competitive element there, isn't there? If you're a pottery and you're not there and your competitors are, that's not very good for you, is it? So, you've kind of almost got to be there. And so that's going to generate some money, isn't it?
Were the architects inspired, or did they visit Rudolf Steiner's excuse my pronunciation, Goetheanum in Switzerland?
I've no idea. I don't know. I'm going to write that one down.
Food for thought, more research.
Indeed, it's always good.
That is stimulating. Linda says there were a lot of exhibition artifacts such as teapots, coins, badges, postcards and playing cards now on sale on eBay.
Indeed.
Okay, so if anyone wants to
and honestly, it's
a collection.
It's a great source of, even if you don't buy them, it's a great research tool to go in and look at things, because they're continually turning up. And just to as an image library, I know they don't want you to use it like that, but it is a really valuable sort of archive, really, eBay. So I'd highly recommend looking at it.
Yeah, I don't tend to think of eBay like that, but that's really
fantastic.
Yeah. And Linda also says there's lots of info at the National Archives and at London Metropolitan Archives about funding government meetings and discussions. So if you want to think about where the money came for this, maybe that's somewhere to start. There was a regular journal called Metroland, which had an exhibition special issue. It describes the contents of each pavilion.
Okay. Yes, the pavilions I didn't really go into very much, because there's just, as we probably gathered, there's just a lot of material.
So much. Yeah. Simon says, great lecture. Just to add, the unadorned concrete finish was echoed in the construction of the new centre court at Wimbledon in 1921 to 22.
Okay.
So that was slightly before, presumably.
Yeah.
Designed by Stanley Peach. The negative response. The negative response of some tennis fans may have contributed towards the planting of ivy, which has since become so emblematic of Wimbledon. Wow, that's fascinating. That's really fascinating.
Oh, there's brilliant stuff coming in here.
I know. I was going to say we're on a roll, so much so that my cat is photobombing madly. And Nita says the Palace of Industry appeared in an episode of The Professionals.
Oh, right.
From Mark Amies.
Yeah.
Wow. Andrew asks, was there any link/relationship between this and the White City exhibition?
Well, I think a link insofar as the Empire exhibition was a descendant of White City, wasn't it? It was part of that whole train from 1851, Hyde Park, and there were Paris is the same, isn't it? The 1925 exhibition and all the Parisian ones and the Columbia World's Fair, and they were just globally, it was a big thing, wasn't it? And I think in 1925 we were trying to outdo everybody in the kind of scale of the endeavour.
Right. Linda said the Worshipful Company of Makers of Playing Cards issued a special set of cards with very deco designs on them.
Linda, you're fantastic. Thank you.
Linda, you're a wealth of information. Thank you so much. Duncan says John Betjeman's Metroland stopped off at the Palace of Arts, which was still standing in the 1970s. I think that's an amazing film, isn't it? I think I don't know if it's still on iPlayer, but it might be on YouTube. Really lovely. Linda says Brent Council is working on doing events about the exhibition at the moment, and they have stuff in their archives.
I would like to get there. It's one of my many things to do. Thank you, Linda. I'm guessing you're an expert on this.
I know you are, Linda. You're definite expert. You need to come and help us out here. Andrew says in Metroland, Betjeman showed the unfinished result of a competition to build a rival to the Eiffel Tower built on that site.
Indeed.
Was that before or after the exhibition?
It was before, I believe. I expect Linda could tell us, but I came across an article about it just the other day, and I believe it's before. I think it was late 19th or early 20th century.
Okay. And Linda just has popped back to say we've been looking at the exhibition in Brent recently. There's a great local historian called Philip Grant who gave a talk at my community library. Linda said she's not an expert, but she's just seen a lot recently as
thank you. Thank you for sharing it, Linda. I appreciate it.
I'm just having now I'm having a look. Matthew, I don't know how quickly you can answer this, Kathryn, but Matthew says, how did it compare to the 1951 Festival of Britain?
Well, The Festival of Britain was focused specifically on Britain, wasn't it? And it went beyond London and out throughout the country. And the Empire Exhibition was about bringing the empire to London. So it was quite different in that respect. Architecturally, design-wise, I think, I mean, the Festival of Britain inspired its own sort of festival style, didn't it? And I think, but did Wembley? Is that the point? That because we haven't heard about it, maybe it didn't. I don't know. It would be really interesting to sort of unpick all of that. But even the Festival of Britain is not as well studied as it might be. So there's loads of opportunities if you want to have a research topic. I would highly advocate for Wembley.
Yeah, it seems to be a really fertile ground.
Yeah, absolutely.
Harry says that the stadium was built on the site of Watkins Folly.
That's it. That's the tower. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I think we've come to the end of our questions, of which there have been many. Thank you, everyone, so much. Kathryn, you've obviously really inspired and interested everybody. But I just wanted to say I'm beguiled by the Never Stop Railway. And I'd love to imagine it's still running somewhere in some kind of alternative universe.
Yes.
Never stopping, just slowing to 2 miles an hour at every station, just to let people pop on.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so thank you very much. So now I just need to do my wind up. Thank you, Kathryn. Thank you, Peter. He agrees about the Never Stop Railway. Okay, so thank you for a brilliant talk. Everyone's really enjoyed it, and it set us up for the new year, the centenary year 2025. If anyone would like to re-watch tonight's webinar, you'll be sent a link in a day or so. It's going to be on YouTube, not Vimeo. We usually send by Vimeo, but I think it's YouTube for some reason. Maybe Vimeo's not working properly or something for us. So watch out for that. Don't forget, please fill in your feedback forms that will be sent out in a day or so. This will automatically enter you into a draw to win a free ticket for the February talk, which actually is scheduled for the 20th of February. I know there hasn't been any publicity about what we're doing in February yet, but February is going to, fingers crossed, feature a world expert on Lalique. Unfortunately, we're a little behind confirming, hence the lack of publicity, but it's almost certain to go ahead. So please just keep your eyes peeled on our website and on our socials for further information about February's proposed Lalique talk. Whatever happens, a talk for February will be on the 20th of February, and we hope to confirm ASAP. So just bear with us. And then if you look on the website, we've definitely confirmed our March talk, which is about Croydon Airport, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. A quick reminder that we're almost sold out of our Centenary Ball tickets for our Centenary Ball in Liverpool to mark the 100th anniversary of the original Art Deco Exposition in Paris. So please, if you'd like to join us, go to our website ASAP and book your ticket. I think there are a few left, but there's been a huge demand. So it'd be lovely if as many people as possible could come. It would be lovely to meet you all. Have a lovely rest of the evening. Look forward to seeing you in February. Please keep your eyes peeled on our socials and website for further information about our February talk. And that's it. Thank you, Kathryn. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening. Good night.